Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us. I'm Kate Markert. I'm Executive Director here at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens, and I have to say, we're in Washington, D.C., and I'm saying that because we are very pleased to have audiences joining us for tonight's program, not just here in the theater, but also by Zoom. And we have many folks on Zoom from all over the place, so just so you know. Now, those of you who are in the theater, I know you know the next thing I'm going to say, yes, please make sure your devices are silenced. Don't want to hear the barks and the, whatever. Now, those of you at home can submit your questions by the Q&A function in Zoom whenever they cross your mind, and we will get to as many as we can, both from here in the theater and from Zoom at the end of the lecture. I also want to take this moment to acknowledge those who have made the additional commitment to support Hillwood as members of our Legacy Council. Many thanks for your thoughtful planning to ensure a vibrant future for Hillwood. Now, tonight's lecture is the first of a four-part series highlighting our current exhibition, From Exile to Avant-Garde, The Life of Princess Natalie Paley. Next week's lecture will feature Amy Fine Collins, and she will be discussing the International Best Dressed list, where Princess Natalie Paley was featured many times, and she's written a book about the best dressed list. I think that's going to be a really cool lecture. Then later in October, Megan and Wilfred Zeisler will explore the forbidden love story and the elegant arts collection and the lifestyle of Princess Paley's parents, Olga Paley and Duke Paul of Russia, he was, of course, a Romanov. And then for the final lecture, Dr. Kenneth Silver, whose most recent book is Jean Cocteau, The Juggler's Revenge, he will talk about Paley, her home in Connecticut, which was named Pebbles. I mean, those of you who've been to see now see, you have to silence your, just saying. Bad enough it's me, but when it's Megan, you're not going to be good. Good. Pebbles was Natalie Paley's home in Connecticut. And that's, if you've been in the exhibition, you see it's the mural there with the pool. The Pebbles pool was quite famous. And she had many fascinating mid-century sort of bold-faced name friends who were there. So Kenneth Silver will be talking all about Pebbles and the mid-century who's who that were there. And he'll also talk about her influence on the burgeoning American fashion world. So I think Kenneth Silver is going to be a very cool lecture also. And there are still tickets available to that, so please register for that. Now, tonight, we are excited to hear from Megan Martinelli, who will give us an in-depth look at Princess Natalie's fashionable network of designers and industry insiders and her own contributions to modern fashion history. But before I hand the mic over, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Megan Martinelli. She joined Hillwood in 2018 and is curator of textiles, apparel, jewelry, and accessories. She has the coolest job here and the longest title. Just saying. She was the lead curator for the 2019 special exhibition, Mid-Century Master, the Photography of Alfred Eisenstadt, 2021's Roaring Twenties, The Life and Style, that was such a great exhibition, The Life and Style of Marjorie Merriweather Post, 2022's Grace of Monaco, Princess in Dior. Also, how fun would that be to pick that out? Just saying. 2024's Marjorie Merriweather Post Paris, another really great show. And she's co-curator of the current exhibition, From Exile to Avant-Garde, The Life of Princess Natalie Paley. And that is on view until January of 2026. So I know you've probably all seen it, but you have time to see it again and bring friends. She's also working on a forthcoming publication on Hillwood's apparel, textiles, and jewelry collection, and that will come out next September, September of 26. Prior to her work at Hillwood, Megan was a research assistant at the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Costume Institute. She holds a Master of Science in Historic Textiles and Costumes from the University of Rhode Island. Her research focuses on identity and expression through fashion and adornment. Now please join me in welcoming our very own Megan Martinelli to the podium.
Thank you so much, Kate, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining, whether you're online or here in person. So tonight, as Kate mentioned, we're going to talk about Princess Natalie Paley. I somehow always end up with the princess to study, and she's no exception. I hope you've seen the exhibition, because tonight we're really going to focus on how her life falls around the fashion industry, both in Paris and New York. So without further ado, I will get started. That was interesting. So of course, Natalie Paley, as Kate alluded to, had two very fashionable parents of the Belle Epoque. Her parents met at the Romanov imperial court in the 1890s. Her mother, Olga, was very beguiling. You can see her cabinet card on the left of this slide here. And then there she is with Natalie's father, Grand Duke Paul of Russia, who was the uncle of Emperor Nicholas II. Grand Duke Paul was also the brother of Alexander III and the son of Alexander II. So he was a Romanov, and this was very much a forbidden love story, and we'll get more into that. We cover it extensively in the exhibition, but it will be discussed in the next lecture. But they essentially had to leave Russia because of their relationship, because, Olga was not a royal, though she was aristocratic. Her marriage and relationship with Grand Duke Paul was not approved, and so they decamped to Paris, where they lived in luxurious exile, and that is where Natalie Paley was born in 1905. But during that kind of Gilded Age period in Paris, Olga had a very high reputation of entertaining and socializing with really the upper echelons of fashionable society in Paris. And she wore Worth and Doucet and was obsessed with shopping. So this kind of aesthetic world is where Princess Natalie was born into. So the discussion about Natalie tonight is framed around three kind of portions of her life. So we begin in the 1920s, where she will ultimately become the wife of the French couturier Lucien Lelong in 1927. And then we will move towards the 1930s, where she's established as a very important figure in French fashionable society, and she's working with Lelong, and then she's dipping her toes even into the film industry. And then we'll move to the 1940s and 50s, where she is joining in on the New York fashion scene. And she has relocated to New York and Connecticut, as Kate mentioned, and is married for a second time to the theatrical Broadway producer John C. Wilson, who we're going to start calling Jack. Natasha, or Natalie, her nickname was Natasha, but I actually prefer to call her Natalie. Her network touches so many different elements of 20th century American fashion. And who she knew is still being discussed today. Diana Vreeland, Christian Dior. The kind of sad part is that people aren't discussing her as much. So I'm hoping that through this exhibition and presentation, we can learn a little bit more about her influence in this kind of milieu, if you will. So as I said, we will start in Paris. So the revolution happened in Russia at a very kind of ill-timed moment for the Paley family. They had been welcomed back by Nicholas II to Russia and invited to build a palace after her parents were exiled for their relationship. Then the revolution happens, and the Grand Duke is killed along with Natalie Paley's older brother. Natalie Paley, her older sister, Irina is 2 years older, Princess Irina is 2 years older than Natalie, along with their mother, Olga, returned to Paris in 1921. So upon their return to Paris, Olga has already been, very well established there. I think they leave Paris around the mid-19-teens. So she has a long period of being well known in French society. So she's easily able to reestablish herself and her two young daughters along in the Russian emigre community. Women's Wear Daily, for instance, is covering Olga's charitable initiatives. You can see this, and I mean, it's amazing. This illustration that's in Women's Wear Daily. Back then it was Women's Wear, but then in the 30s, they then adapted Daily, and it was a trade publication. But this is an event that Olga sponsored to raise money as a fundraiser for the Russian emigres living in Paris and part of that community. I love how the designers are all labeled on each of the women's backs. So Natalie and her older sister Irina were kind of the centerpiece of these events. They were called fêtes, and they were usually in the summer, and then there was one that would happen in the fall too. Olga liked to have them in Biarritz because there's a very strong Russian emigre community there. And the other interesting connection to early 1920s fashion that happens is with Grand Duke Paul's two older children from his previous marriage to Princess Alexandra of Greece. So you have his oldest daughter, Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, up at the very top there. And then at the bottom is Maria Pavlovna's younger brother, Grand Duke Dmitri, and he is with his girlfriend in the early 1920s, Coco Chanel. So Dmitri meets Chanel in 1921, which is the same year that his half-sisters and his father's second wife happened to move to Paris. So that's a really great entree for Princess Natalie. And then Grand Duke Dimitri's sister, Maria, up there, sees an opportunity to kind of get involved in the fashion industry herself. I have a quote from her memoir about what it was like to come in onto the scene of French fashion in the early 1920s. We had been torn out of our brilliant setting. We had been driven off the stage, still dressed in our fantastic costumes. We had to take them off now, make ourselves other, more everyday clothes. So, Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna establishes her own embroidery firm, kind of a textile manufacturing firm, learns how to use a machine embroidery, an embroidery machine to produce these designs, and then begins working for Chanel in the early 1920s. So there's so many different ways that Natalie Paley could have gotten onto the scene of fashion. Could have been through her mother, could have been through her half-brother and her half-sister, who she was very close to. unfortunately, Kitmere, which was the name of the embroidery firm, closed after a few years. You do see from the Met's collection a Chanel dress from 1922 that features the Kitmere chain stitch embroidery on this slide. And for more on Kitmere, I recommend you all look into the research of Nadia Albertini and Sofia Kurjan. They published a book in French extensively looking into this embroidery house. So Natalie had this established circle, relatives involved in the fashion industry. She's on the left there, she's very young. And then her older sister, Irina, marries Prince Theodore Romanov to kind of return to the Romanov family. Yes, they had the same grandmother, so they were essentially cousins. But the whole wedding party wore Worth, which, as I mentioned, was a designer that Olga favored during the Belle Epoque period. And it was extensively published in the Parisian press. You can see Paris Vogue here on the left, or in the center and on the left. There's a photo of the family. Suspiciously, Natalie is not in the photo, which is odd to me. And then I joke, she's taking the picture. But no, she's not. But you can see Dimitri on the very far, and I know I have a pointer, so let me use it. Dimitri, there he is. That's Dimitri, and oh my gosh, it's always a little hard for me. Sorry. There's Olga. There's Grand Duchess Maria, the half-sister. And there's Irina in her lovely beaded wedding gown, and you can see her headpiece featured in the center. So this event was well covered. There's also a lot of coverage of the emigre community in the south of France in Biarritz. This is just kind of a vacation publication that featured Irina and her son, Prince Michel Romanov, who is her firstborn with Prince Theodore. And then in this lovely little group of folks eating, I actually zoomed in so you could see these two garden party attendees. Natalie is on the right, and her half-sister, Grand Duchess Maria, is on the left. So very fashionable French bobs, finger waves. So essentially what starts happening is these fetes become more and more popular, and they're very well covered even by Women's Wear Daily. And so they're a way for people to learn the name Princess Paley, whether it's in reference to Olga, Irina, or all three. I zoomed in on Natalie's back kind of V-shaped beaded dress here. That's number 6 for the scintillating evening mode that was observed at the Sunday dinner dances at the Paris Ritz. So Natalie is, maybe emerging into the fashion illustration in the industry press quite prominently with her family. They also don't quite write copy the same way that they used to. So Lilong is also involved in these fetes. I realized I didn't give an example of reporting on one of his events, but I think he may have also known Olga, her mother, Natalie Paley's mother, via the Russian, Natalie Paley's mother's connection earlier in Paris to Lilong's parents, who originally established the couture firm. Lilong's parents had a Belle Epoque salon called A&E. Their names were Arthur and Eleanor. And then he inherited the business and took over in the early 1920s, and then made it kind of, took it kind of out of this Belle Epoque kind of very formal world and made it more sleek and sporty. He was a great business person and had a very good eye. He was not a fashion designer. But he did run the French Chambre Syndicale during the war and the occupation, and a lot of people credit him for preserving the French couture industry and saving it from being re-established in Berlin under German occupation. So that's one credit to his name. He's also known for starting new early versions of pret-a-porter. You could order editions from his salon in Paris, so you could order copies of a model that you were seeing and you were shown, and they were tailored to you in the salon. There's actually a great little film of a fashion show in Lelong's salon during the time that Natalie Paley was married to him in the exhibition, where you see like these editions in action. So Lelong's contributions were really interesting, I will say. But they marry in 1927. They don't have any children. The child at Natalie Paley's feet is Prince Michel. Of course, Natalie wore Lelong. She wore a cream pané velvet long-sleeved dress. This was August. But I think maybe the climate was different. Also, pané is very lightweight silk velvet, so perhaps it was comfortable. The Juliette cap headdress is also very of the time. And once she becomes Madame Lelong, she is very much established. People are really interested in what she has to say, what she's wearing, and she's kind of the face of Lucien Lelong. So I think I mentioned, I'm not sure if I mentioned his foray into the perfume industry, but he was one of the early couturiers along with Poiret and Chanel who realized that there was another market there by licensing and developing your own fragrance. So that's another one of his claim to fame. He also wasn't afraid of the American woman and traveling to the US. So soon after they married, they traveled to Chicago together, I think to promote his line of knits, which it's kind of clear that she's wearing this little suit of knits. So she began to appear in Vogue Paris. She was photographed by Steichen for this spread here that you see in the center, one of her first in Vogue. And her mother got along really well with Lelong, which was nice. Olga passed away sadly in 1929 after kind of losing a battle to cancer. And I think they didn't have any plans for her interment in her arrangements. So ultimately, she was buried in Lelong's crypt. So you can see the two of them together to the left, and then from the same outing is Natalie Paley. Here's Natalie at a polo match with Lelong on her left, and then Count Montbrison. So I mentioned that her sister Irina married a Romanov. That was not a happy marriage. That was kind of a family marriage in a way. The much more stylish Count Montbrison kind of swept Irina off her feet, and they enjoyed an amazing courtship together that began in the 1920s, late 1920s, and lasted until their deaths. But Montbrison also, they finally did get married in 1950, Irina. But yes, Natalie Paley was close to her sister and her sister's paramour, just to say. So we kind of move into the 1930s section, which is a very big section in the history of Natalie Paley, I will say. This is when she really starts working with her two close friends, the photographers George Hoyningen-Huene and Horst P. Horst, his protege and his partner. So in this photo by George Hoyningen-Huene, she's wearing a jersey striped daytime outfit from Lelong, and I think it's kind of great that I also found this photo in her scrapbooks, which are at Yale. One of her scrapbooks is from the 1930s of her at her home with Lelong and all of her dogs. She was very much a dog person, wearing the ensemble very casually. So I thought that would be kind of fun to see. So Lelong and Natalie, of course, socialized with Chanel, which makes me really think Chanel may have even introduced them via the half-siblings connection. So here they are skiing in St. Moritz around 1931. And you can see it's Natalie and Lucien Lelong, it's Natalie and Chanel, it's Chanel and Lucien Lelong. Everybody was friends. I'm really interested in two elements of Chanel's look, her like flower corsage on her beret and her little ski pants. Those are the things that I'm immediately drawn to. And of course, Natalie being a 7-time International Best Dress List inductee looks fabulous too. So I mentioned kind of what's going on with Natalie and Lucien Lelong. They're happy for a while, but she also seems to have this courtship or friendship with the dancer Sergei Lifar, who was a Ukrainian-born dancer with the Ballet Russe, and then he himself became a choreographer in Paris. Here they are dancing at Lido Beach. These photos are very famous. They had a really wonderful kind of group beach trip. And then you can see Lelong is in that little pyramid with Lifar too. So, I mean, he knew, whatever. So, it was a different time. Truly. We don't know really what these relationships were, if they were inspirational. Lifar was also really great friends with Chanel. So just kind of a creative circle of people who enjoyed each other's company, I think. I had to include a few beach pictures from the 30s because this really is about the fashion of Natalie Paley, and I don't have anywhere to show them otherwise. So my favorite is the beach pajama set that you see down at the left, as well as the little kind of beach jacket she's wearing. So next, in terms of people that she becomes involved with, is Jean Cocteau. They have a epistolary romance. They exchange letters, but they also spend time together in Paris. They meet in 1930 and kind of have a dalliance or a relationship in the early 1930s. And he is inspired by her to create a character in his play, The Infernal Machine, which is based on the Oedipus myth. And he fashions a sphinx named Natasha, inspired by her kind of silence and inscrutability. Here she is sitting at his desk, and this photo of Cocteau is from some of her personal papers that are now part of the permanent collection here at Hillwood. Cocteau, of course, is very involved in 20th century fashion and design, obviously. So here is his partnership with Chanel earlier in the 1920s for Antigone. He asked Chanel to design the costumes. Then at the center in 1937, he collaborated with another one of Natalie Paley's friends and Chanel's rival, supposedly, Elsa Schiaparelli, on this wool suit jacket that is embroidered by the French house of Lesage. And then you're looking at a tunic that is from the theatrical 1940s production of The Machine Infernal that features a character inspired by Natalie Paley. That was designed by Natalie Paley's other friend and their mutual friend, Oliver Meisel, who is a costume and set designer, too, and part of the Bright Young Things set. Her friends in France are these very well-known and well-celebrated fashionable women during the 1930s. So they are often referred to by Bettina Ballard as these two, the women who make fashion. So I am going to start to pronounce some French names for you all. So hopefully Wilfred isn't boarding a plane to correct me. So on the far left, we have the Vicomte Marie Larry de Noailles. who represents the patron of the arts among the fashionable women. And Noai also had a relationship and was a patron of Jean Cocteau earlier, but she seems to have forgiven Natalie. There they are in Salzburg in 1933 together. And then in the center is Isabelle Rusidan Midvani Sert, who married Joseph Sert, the Spanish artist. She had a pet monkey and is kind of a very bohemian, fashionable figure in Paris and was a friend of Chanel via her connection with Misha Sert and her marriage to Joseph Sert. And then on the far right is Princess Baba Faucigny-Lesage. So she was also another very well-known kind of figure in fashionable Paris in the 1930s, and they all socialized together. And Baba is the woman whose hat, your face is kind of obscured by her bowler. But Baba and Natalie and Chanel and Lefar and many others had these fancy dress balls that were very well publicized. And so that's kind of what they did besides hanging out in Venice and skiing. So Natalie also had platonic artistic friends, and that included the surrealist artist Pavel Chichilev, who represented her many times, and his work of her from the early 1930s, where she's wearing a beret, is in the special exhibition. She also was friends with Oliver Meisel, who I mentioned as being a collaborator with Jean Cocteau. He's a British-born costume and set designer, but he made this amazing portrait of her posing with lilies that you see on this slide, and also an exhibition that's on special loan from his estate in the UK via the National Trust. Another British kind of multi-hyphenate collaborator of Natalie Paley is Cecil Beaton, who did some amazing fashion photographs of her in the 1930s. These are just two examples, and these were two that I could not put in the exhibition, so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share them. Beaton was a close friend and confidant of Natalie's. They would reconnect later when she lived in New York. You can see Natalie posing for him in the 40s. And then there's also a lovely scrapbook image of Natalie and Beaton together at this event in New York that also includes Natalie's second husband, who's on the left, along with Anita Liu, also on the left. Beaton made these lovely caricatures of Natalie and her second husband, which are in our collection today too, and they represent her elegance with her jewelry and her upswept hair that she was known for in the 1940s. We're going to move to the 40s in a second, but we just had to dip there for a moment from my Beaton discussion. But back to Huynigan Hune and Horse P. Horse. So these are some of the most influential 20th century fashion photographers, and Natalie Paley was a great collaborator with them. Huynigan Hune she met during her Vogue Paris days. He was affiliated with Vogue Paris then, and he was studying under Edward Steichen. And then Horse P. Horse was his partner, romantic partner, and his protege. Horse P. Horse did this amazing portrait of Natalie that's on the right of this slide, where she's wearing it looks like Persian lamb capelet. Remember that outfit because it's going to come up again. It's Le Long. She wore exclusively Le Long. So her work with these photographers, and here's one of her by Man Ray, kind of informed the mood of the mid-1930s. You see a lot more sequins, lots of drama. Many of these designs are very modern. I included an example of a sequined Le Long suit here just so you could see something similar to what Natalie Paley is wearing in the photo at the center of this slide. And I also included a well-known photo that's a still of a film that George Hoynigan-Hume was working on that starred Horst P. Horst and Natalie Paley, but there was no title, no plot, and it's lost. So we just have this still that's looking very stylish in 1980s. Natalie Paley was involved in the creative endeavors of her husband's business, Lucien Lelong's. She worked with the interior designer Jean-Michel Franck in 1934 to reimagine and revive the perfume room at Lelong's Parisian salon. Jean Franck was a very well-known interior designer. He was a furniture maker, and he was an early patron of the Giacometti brothers, and actually, incidentally, an uncle of Anne Frank. So I mentioned she had a very brief but impressive film career. She was in 6 films over 3 years. The first one was Le Pivier, directed by Marcel Lebriere, who is actually Lucien Lelong's cousin. Lelong did the costumes for this film, which I think is really hard to find, but if you do find it, maybe you should watch it. Prince Jean was her next film. She went totally platinum, totally Jean Harlow for that one. And a portrait of her by Dorothy Wilding that you see here kind of illustrates her during that time, total blonde bombshell. And I think she looks like she could be wearing, I mean, I guess it's supposed to be Lelong, but she could be wearing V&A. It really looks like it based on the drape of that gown. Then her other films, briefly for a second in the private life of Don Juan, just really like a cameo. And the costumes for that were done by Oliver Meisel, of course, in 1934. That filmed in London. Then she was in L'Homme des Faux Bergers, and that film featured costumes by Omar Khayyam. That's a great one. There's clips of that in the exhibition, so I encourage you to go check that out because the costumes are wonderful in that. And then Sylvia Scarlett opposite Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, and her costumes for that were designed by Bernard Newman. She returned to Paris and did one more movie, again with Marcel, her husband's cousin, L'Homme Nouveau, and that is also a very fashionable film. The costumes are by Jacques Manuel, and so not Lelong. She does finally divorce Lucien Lelong in 1937. Ultimately, they just part ways. She's also getting ready to marry again. She's moved to the U.S. So she's saying goodbye. She did still keep his World War I ID bracelet. And she also had a fragrance named after her. It was named N, which supposedly rhymes with hate in French, which I believe it does. Kind of a dig. And then you can see the art for a 1940s advertisement, which is a little bit dark, macabre, I will say. Someone with a dog, too, Widow's Weeds. And then I do want to give you a quick description of what N smelled like. It was described as cool, sharp, as bitter as a tonic, with its astringent notes of wood, tea, lang-lang, and damp leaves, an aristocratic coolness which makes it the most haughty, attractive, and taboo fragrance I know. So you could be talking about Natalie Paley, I suppose. So her marriage to Jack Wilson, she marries him in 1937 at his home in Connecticut, Pebbles, which was just mentioned. It's in Fairfield. He's a Broadway producer. He's known for managing Noel Coward in his career. They also had a relationship, Noel and Jack, in the 1920s. But they marry in 37, and there's actually a photo on the bottom left of this slide of Natalie's kind of daytime silk wedding ensemble, posing with Noel Coward and Jack and members of Jack's family, as well as a really great image of Natalie in this suit in the 40s, which is pretty incredible. When she's living in New York and Connecticut, they have an apartment in Manhattan. She continues to work with Hoynigan Hune and Horst P. Horst, and she's modeling for lots of New York brands. She's able to kind of be like, okay, I'm not working for Lelong anymore. We're not married anymore. So she's branching out. So she's modeled for Tiffany. She is wearing a Lelong gown in this 1937 image of her for Henry Bendel. But then here she is for Saks, wearing a gold gown. So it's, it's nice to branch out. Pebbles, the pool at Pebbles, is a hub of events and fun occasions. Lots of fashionable people visit, lots of her friends. I feel like lots of ideas were exchanged there, which I'll get to in just a moment. Her very close and dear friend is Baron Nicky de Gunsberg. He is essentially someone who's described as having impeccable taste. He's known for throwing fancy dress balls because he is kind of a bon vivant in Paris. But when he immigrates to the United States, he ultimately lands as an editor at Harper's Bazaar, Town and Country, and then finally Vogue. He had a Russian banker father, and his mother was Polish and Brazilian. He's known for having a scathingly dark humor, and he truly is Natalie's one of her closest friends. She and Baron Nicky de Gunsberg go in together on a very short-lived but interesting fashion business endeavor. Through their connection to the Bright Young Things, the affiliates of Cecil Beaton, they know Barbara Karinska, who's a Russian-born master costumer. She's best known for collaborating with George Balanchine, but in the summer of 1940, Nicky de Gunsberg and Natalie Paley opened a retail shop for Barbara Karinska to sell some of her designs to clients. It's not a salon. You could go in there and buy some ready-made pieces, lingerie, accessories, and you could have a few things, obviously, custom-made. And it is at 56th and 5th. It's very well received in the press. Natalie Paley modeled, as I'll show you in a moment. She's actually in this spread. There's an example of a Karinska design on the left, and here Natalie is, I guess her friend, the jewelry designer, Jean Schlumberger, the French jewelry designer, had a brief moment where he was designing clothes. And as it's part of this spread, it's unclear if his clothes were retailed at Karinska's. But I think it's interesting that she's not wearing the Karinska gown in this spread. And I will say kind of the design of the page is very kind of Schlumberger as well. So Karinska, let me just tell you, unfortunately, here's a quote from the person who studied her, Tony Bennett, who published Bentley, I'm sorry, not Tony Bennett, on her in 1995 with a foreword by Edward Gorey. Things were not ready. Karinska was to be found madly crocheting lace collars, cuffs, and hems to provide original ornament on some rather less than original black dresses. Ultimately, the kind of outlet was financially unsustainable. Karinska wanted to make everything. She couldn't stay to a budget, and it was just too lavish and theatrical for a world at war. But here are two more examples of Karinska's designs on this page, including a silk charmeuse scarf with said embroidered flowers. Her other very close friend, even though that kind of closed, but her long-term very close friend was Fulco de Verdura, Sicilian-born aristocrat who started designing jewelry at Chanel, and then he finally struck out on his own in 1937. He supposedly even traveled to the U.S. with Natalie Paley and Nikki de Gunsberg. They were going to try to make it in Hollywood in 1934. I mean, Natalie Paley already had establishment in French cinema. But Vidura began working for Paul Flatto in Hollywood, and he designed jewels for Philadelphia Story, which starred Katharine Hepburn. And he also met Diana Vreeland, who you know then will wear the Maltese cross cuffs all the time. That'll become her signature. But he was also a mainstay at Pebbles. So here he is. Oh, let me go back just so I can point out the jewels. So she wore a lot of Vidura, and we have 3 of her brooches on special loan in the exhibition. So please make sure you get to go see them. And he also made this lovely little kind of lonely but personal sketch of her walking one of her dogs in the streets of New York in the rain. So finally, she started working for Mambochet, who was a Chicago-born designer. His father was French. He studied art in Paris after serving in the First World War. He became editor at Vogue Paris, and then by the late 1920s, he felt confident enough to open his own salon. You can see Mambochet, and along with his partner, the illustrator Douglas Pollard, are guests at Pebbles. Natalie Paley begins working for him in his New York atelier in 1942, excuse me. She's often described as a salesperson or a vendeuse, but actually she put in some very long hours. She managed many of his high-profile clients that were very demanding, and a lot of them were her friends, so she was very useful in that regard. She, of course, wore his designs modeled for him. She manned the salon and managed the business while he traveled. She was described as his right hand during the 40s and 50s. Also in attendance at this little weekend at Pebbles, I have to say, is Pauline Potter, who is a fashion designer in her own right. And in 1950, she would marry Philippe de Rothschild. It's the woman with the streaked hair up at the center. So she's another member of their milieu. So we have a whole Mambochet section, of course, because it's a major part of Natalie Paley's fashion arc, her time working with him. She even traveled to Paris with him after the war, to kind of re-enter into kind of the French design couture world following the end of World War II. We're lucky to have 4 examples of the designs that Mambochet made for her, that she was expected to wear, that are in the exhibition, including this red dress that I traveled all over France to get, and now is part of our permanent collection and has been conserved. And you can see Natalie with her friend, the Russian-born designer based in New York, Valentina, and then Sergei Oblonsky. And Natalie's wearing a wonderful Mambochet design. Mambochet is remembered for being very couture-like. He had intended to return to Paris after the Second World War, but he just stayed because he had a great clientele and basis. He was very interested in technique and construction. He was kind of almost like ascetic at first, inspired by Vianney in her designs. But I think during the war, he became a little more playful and would include some beading and these kind of self-appliques that you see on these bodices here. But he also served everyone ice water at the showroom, just like some certain contemporary designers are known recently to have done, because he didn't want to distract from the clothes. So, as I mentioned, Pebbles was really a hub for all of her friends, and everyone knew each other. So Diana Vreeland visited many times. Vidura was always there. Then you can see Christian Dior came into town, and there's one photo of him visiting Pebbles, but he actually came 2 or 3 times at least. Christian Dior actually worked for Lelong, Natalie Paley's first husband. Lelong, as I mentioned, he hired some really great burgeoning designers, which included Dior, Pierre Balmain, Givenchy, all of these incredible, kind of our mid-century core couture designers began working at Le Lang. So it seems like Natalie and Dior remained friends as he enjoyed a lovely Palm Sunday at the Fairfield house. Valentina, who is finally, I feel like, getting appreciation today, was another very close friend of Natalie's. You saw Natalie went to her famous Orthodox Easter dinners, but there they are, kind of traveling to Europe together, kind of cheekily enjoying some champagne, it looks like. But even at Valentina's own events, Natalie still wore Main Bochet. She had to be very loyal. Schiaparelli was another guest, along with the French actress Annabella, and then Louise Macy, who is a relative of the Macy family. So really interesting group of people coming together for these fun poolside weekends at Pebbles. And you can imagine some of the conversations and connections and collaborations that were made here. Just the way that Natalie Paley brought together a lot of different 20th century fashionable figures, we have been able to bring together more pieces that belong to Natalie Paley here at Hillwood. So there's a new display on the second floor of the mansion of a hat made by a New York City-based milliner that was recently given to our collection that belonged to Natalie Paley. It's very cute. It's skull cap, flock silk velvet, along with a pin that belonged to her half-brother, Grand Duke Dimitri, from Cartier, Paris. So the collection and kind of the stewardship of the legacy of Natalie Paley here at Hillwood continues. You can also read more about Natalie and her family in this translation of Wilfrid Zeisler's study of the art collection of Olga and Paul that came out just this past spring, and I was able to write a chapter where I go into detail about Natalie Paley's life and her incredible artistic connections. So these are my works cited, if you will. And I know I went a little over, but I will still let the questions, there's a microphone, and if you've got them, look for our lovely person with the microphone. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name.
No problem. Hello. No problem. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you.
And thank you all for listening.
I can jump in with a question from Zoom if nobody else has a question in the theater. Someone wanted to know if Paley was working because she needed to financially, or did she do it because she loved being a part of that world she was in?
That's a really great question, and one that I often ponder because it's not totally clear. I think the answer I've gotten is that they were okay, but the money helped. So, coming at first in the 20s, it did seem like she needed to be doing something. And then, yes, so I think she was working. I think she loved being involved, but I think it was a choice because she did put some long hours in, especially in the 40s with Main Bochet. Thank you for the question. Oh, please.
Hi, could you tell us how you came about collecting all the wonderful things, the pictures, the things that are on display, how you got that material?
Yes. So the question is, how did I get all of the wonderful pictures, the things on display, and the collection? So we acquired the Paley family collection in 2022 as part of our initiative to really develop kind of these incredible stories of imperial Russian aristocratic families and emigres, which is kind of part of Marjorie Post. Obviously, it's part of her mission in establishing Hillwood and in the strength in our collection. So that was one reason why that collection, which was came to us from a private collector was of interest. And within that collection, it was very strongly emphasis was very strong on Natalie Paley and her life. So that's how I at first started to make the connections with Jean Cocteau, and that she had this amazing fashion career and was such a tour de force in the industry. So that aspect. And then all this other material, if you just really start looking, you start to see her everywhere. Hoynigan Hune and Horse Be Horse were really prolific photographers, and she's in many of their work. I go through. We have subscriptions to archival publications here at Hillwood, like Harper's Bazaar, and sometimes we have Vogue. Vogue Paris is available free on the Bibliothèque Nationale de France website. So you can really take a deep dive if you want to. And then in terms of some of the pieces that are in the exhibition on loan, we were connected to members of Palay's family who were really grateful to have met, and people who knew her via a researcher named Beatrice Cott, a French researcher who began studying Palay's life very extensively several years ago. So really just serendipitous way to meet people. Please, Kate.
I just wanted to mention that I actually go into how we got the collection in the forward to the book. There was a whole discussion about how it happened.
Yes. And this was something Wilfred was keenly researching for many, many years, the history of Olga and Paul and their collection. So that also. Of course.
I have another question from Zoom. Don't worry, we'll get to your question in just 1 second. Someone had a comment and then a question. They were talking about how Paley married Jack Wilson, who could have potentially positioned her more in the film scene, and they're wondering if there's a reason that Paley did not return to the screen after the movies that she made.
So that's also a really good question. Thank you. It's funny because I scrutinized, part of this research took me to the Noel Coward letters and archives at the University of Birmingham in the UK. So I was able to read Noel saying to Jack, "Do you think she would even do something like on the stage with me in New York?" No, she didn't want to do it. I found another article where she referred to Hollywood as a nightmare. So she really didn't like it. It wasn't for her. Now, people have opinions on her acting. I will say Sylvia Scarlett is a little, but she's playing a caricature of herself. It's kind of slapstick. Some of these other films, she's pretty sophisticated and compelling in the French films. Oh, yeah, yes. So, I appreciate that question so much. It just didn't sound like it was something she wanted to do. I did read somewhere that she didn't like doing it because she kind of had to work hard at it and didn't want to hone the craft. But
I was interested in the Russian emigre community that she socialized with and with the dancers. So you mentioned Karinska and Serge Lefar. And I wondered, do you know if Balanchine ever came or any of the other Russian dancers?
oh yes, Balanchine was at Pebbles. Yes, we have a photo.
That's very exciting.
Photo of him. Yes, Balanchine came to Pebbles. I think even before this whole Karinska attempt at a retail store happened. And we have a little section in the exhibit where I went a little wild with these Pebbles scrapbooks. I should say just quickly that the Pebbles are part of the John C. Wilson papers at the Beinecke Library at Yale University. John C. Wilson was a prolific scrapbooker. It's like looking at, his scrapbooks are like, I guess the best way for me to describe it is, I hate to cheapen it this way, but it's like Instagram, because he's showing who's coming to the house, who they're hanging out with, the antics that they're up to, just who's there, who's meeting who. And then he also is interspersing that with these very cunning and witty collages and clippings from life and look. He seemed like someone she really enjoyed. I think she had a really great sense of humor, too. That comes across in some of the letters that I've read. Really kind of sarcastic, which I think might have been why she liked de Gunsberg so much, her close friend. Thank you for that question. Please.
Did they know each other, Marjorie?
That's another really good question, and I wish I covered that a little more explicitly at the beginning. I don't think they met. However, Natalie Paley's sister, Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna, was invited to a dinner or tea, a reception in the 1920s at Marjorie Post's home in New York, her New York apartment. So, and also, I mean, Grand Duchess Maria is actually the closer sister than Irina ultimately in the end. I think they had a lot more in common socially too. So, I mean, there's potential. You never know. But we do at least know that Marjorie Post met her sister. However, the way that really Marjorie Post, I think, fits into this is the way that she has so many pieces that relate to the legacy of Natalie Paley's parents. I am going to write a little article that's going to come out in October in the newsletter, and I think it'll then also come out for members, called Our Mutual Friends. Play on that Dickens book, where I talk about some of Natalie Paley's connections to Marjorie Post, because there's a few beyond just Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna. Of course, they knew Sergei Oblonsky. I showed a picture of Sergei and Natalie Paley. So, yeah, that's something to kind of look forward to, too. I think different generations and maybe slightly different sensibilities, but, who knows? Thank you for that question.
We have time for one more question, if there's another question in the theater. If not, I have a question, since you have that lovely book cover up there. Megan, would you like to wrap us up by giving a quick plug for the next lecture that you'll be partaking in 2 weeks?
Of course. So on October 21st, myself and my co-curator, Dr. Wilfred Zeisler, who is the chief curator and deputy director and chief curator here at Hillwood, will be speaking on this publication and the art collection. And I think we're going to be really focusing on the different spaces that kind of Natalie Paley inhabited, and the way the art collection kind of percolates down through those spaces. So it should be a very exciting discussion to be having.
Let's give a huge round of applause for Megan.
Thank you all. And I also really enjoyed your questions. They were wonderful.